the Youth for SDGs campaign, and then we'll get. I mean, I'll then complement that with some more intro. Yeah. But just wanted to thank everyone first for coming. This is our third webinar, I believe, and the topic is beyond COP21, and the bold statement that there is no Plan B and no Planet B. So we have to discuss a lot of items, and I'll let Rachel start off.
Okay, so hi everybody, my name is Rachel. I've been helping Donovan with the Youth for SDGs campaign, and it was born out of the Millennium Campus Conference this summer in New York, and our whole goal is to raise awareness about the SDGs and show young people like us that they can get involved in helping to achieve these goals in whatever capacity they want. So we're mostly based on Facebook and just work a lot to share resources, and we're hoping to, and we do these webinars, and then we're also hoping to start a campus ambassador program so that our campaign to raise awareness about what an SDG is, and what the UN is trying to do to advance the world, what it all is about. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rachel. And we're very, very excited to be here to host this webinar and to work with, everyone here today. We feel it's so important to really raise awareness on the SDGs because we each have a unique role to play in accomplishing those. And, as we've mentioned in previous webinars, the agendas were set, and each month there are new sustainable development agendas like the COP21 being adopted, but the real discussion has to be with the implementation and follow-up and accountability, because at the end of the day the youth are going to be responsible for actually putting these plans into action and making sure that they are sustained for the next generation. So that really gives us sort of a lot of responsibility, but also excitement to contribute to the process. So this particular webinar, hosted by Youth for SDGs, we're also collaborating with the 10 by 2020 campaign, coordinated by Emily, as well as the Fair for All and Fair Air Coalition, coordinated by Pedro. So we're very excited to sort of work with them also, since climate change is such a cross-cutting issue in the SDGs, but also in sustainable development in general. And that's sort of how we want to preface the webinar, is by realizing that climate change itself is not an independent issue in its own. It's not sort of an isolated sort of crisis that can be mitigated through individual actions, but rather it's interconnected with many other things. And therefore, the approach to climate change and to environmental sustainability has to, requires a multidimensional plan. Climate change affects not only terrestrial land, but also affects ocean life. It affects our water. It affects our health, poverty, and I mean almost everything. And this is because humans and the environment and nature are sort of coexisting on society, and therefore all our actions have implications on the environment, and everything that happens in the environment, in the natural world, has implications on our well-being as humans. So that's really sort of an exciting thing to realize, and hopefully hearing from different perspectives we'll be able to dig deeper into that. Another thing is COP21 is, for those who might not know, it's really the biggest UN climate change conference in history, and it's meant to come to an intergovernmentally agreed plan for climate change. And I think Claire will really get more into this. But one thing that we wanted to highlight first is that this is sort of the last day of negotiations, or next to last day, at least open to the public. So it's really pertinent that we're discussing this today, because the voice of the youth has been advocated for previously through the conference on youth that happened just before COP21, but also at COP21 with a lot of youth delegates advocating for what you think is important. Not only that, but back in December 3rd was I think it was the day for the generations in the future, which really highlighted the role of young people in implementing the Sustainable Development Plan, the outcome of COP21, and the role of young people in mobilizing that. So we're very excited. We're going to end on a quote that says, it was from the Secretary General, that said, "Our generation, the youth, are the first one that can eradicate poverty, but also the last one that can save our planet from climate change," which I think resonates with a lot of us and with our ambitions and passions and why we're here today. So I've been talking too much, so we want to hear from our wonderful speakers. We're going to start with Claire. Claire is a former student at Boston University. She's now director of Citizens Voice, which is a part of a bigger entity called the Citizens Climate Lobby, and the Pathway to the Paris program. So she's been very involved in sort of the prep to COP21, and will give us some good insight on that. We also have Pedro. Pedro is calling from California, so it's early morning for him. He's a PhD student in chemical and environmental engineering at UC Riverside, originally from Spain, and he launched and coordinating the Fair for All campaign and founder of the Fair Air Coalition, which seeks to make links between climate change and health. Then we have Emily Nocito, who's calling in from Long Island. She's currently a student at Stony Brook University studying coastal environmental studies. And she's part of the Ocean Sanctuary Alliance, and she as well launched the 10 by 2020 campaign, which seeks to advocate for SDG 14, life below water, and environmental sustainability pertinent to the oceans. Then we'll hear from Lauren Etter, who is currently a Millennium Campus Network Fellow, as well as a mechanical engineer at Boston University, and she's working on culturally appropriate and eco-friendly technologies to provide sustainable water supplies in communities in Zambia. And this is through Engineers Without Borders. And finally, we're very happy to have Tim. Tim is from the Make It Real organization. He was founder of the Make It Real initiative, who played a big part in the innovation track at COI, Conference on Youth. I believe he has studied in the Technology and Science University in Hong Kong, but currently in Paris. So very happy to have our wonderful speakers here. I think we're going to have a great discussion, both for those in attendance as well as those who will be watching the webinar later in the week. So with that, I'll just pass it on to Claire to sort of give us an introduction of what is COP21, what is the significance, and what is happening there, and what are you saying essentially. So thanks so much.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Yeah, COP21 is a pretty exciting place to be. There are so many events constantly going on. It's pretty overwhelming. Most people, I feel like everyone here isn't sleeping very much at all. But the overall tone of COP21 has been really optimistic, and there's been a lot of really good things happening so far, a lot of really great calls for action and things following up with that. So like the United States, Canada, the EU, China are all calling for a target of 1.5 degrees of warming instead of 2, which is really huge and really very exciting. The United States is backing that up with at least 800 million in funds for climate finance. So that's definitely, I think that's double of what was previously promised. So there's definitely some action behind what we're also going to do, behind what we promise. However, the biggest bad guy in the COP so far has interestingly kind of been Saudi Arabia, not China or Brazil, how it has been or the United States, or as it has been in the past, which is kind of interesting. They've made some claims of how they need to be compensated for the loss in oil revenue that they will be suffering from. which some people think is a pretty audacious claim. But there's something called the Fossil of the Day that the Climate Action Network puts out every day, of basically who's the worst, who's kind of been like the worst bad guy, I guess, in the conference. And so that's kind of what I was referring to with Saudi Arabia, I guess, being like the biggest bad guy. The United States has also gotten it recently for not following up more with climate finance and things like that, for taking out things like loss and damage in the text. But sorry, getting a bit of a tangent. But overall, the atmosphere has been really positive. And I personally wasn't sure if it was almost like too naive because it was so positive. But something that I thought was really interesting of a talk that I just went to, talking about how innovation is created, and how innovation is one of the things I remember, I was talking to my uncle once about, what if we treated climate change like the Manhattan Project? What if we just got all the scientists and the best scientists in a room and threw a bunch of money at them and told them to solve the problem? And I remember him telling me, well, that's not how innovation works. That's not how people think that you could throw money at a problem and it will change it. And, but what this talk was talking about was things like the Manhattan Project worked. In that case, that worked because people thought a solution could happen. The reason we got to the moon with Kennedy's was because it thought it could happen. And right now, what we're building a lot of that momentum is belief that it can happen. And that's what I think this COP has done a really good job of doing. And I think that will really spur the innovation that we need. So it's a really good feeling to be in that here. So yeah, I can talk more about the specific work that I'm doing, but that's kind of just a generalization of what's happening at the COP.
Yeah, thanks so much, Claire. Just from hearing you can tell how exciting it is. And it's wonderful to see that. But so it seems that there's still no consensus on an agreement. Is that still true? And then,
Yeah.
Specifically, what are the points of controversy? And, are they real? Is the consensus a political disagreement, or is it, based on the science, which we'll hear a little bit about later? But I guess what is driving this lack of consensus, and what is, the plan for getting an agreed upon agenda?
Right. So the final draft text it won't be like submitted until tomorrow, and like that's when they'll agree on it. It's the way the conference is set up, like the agreement doesn't come out until like the very last day or the day after the last day, because today is theoretically the last day. But it's the last day of the conference is never the last day of the conference. It always goes over. These past few nights, yesterday's day ended at 6 a.m. this morning, and same with the day before that. So they're going into super hyperdrive right now, and trying to get out these last few details, because the negotiators always leave their bottom line to the last minute, and figuring out the nasty little details is what takes up the most time. So to answer your question about what you need for consensus, so where we're currently at is people think, so the whole idea of Kyoto and having like a binding agreement where everyone has to come together and everyone's going to have to reduce their emissions by this much, or else like there'll be bad little boys and girls, and we'll get somehow within the international legal framework, we'll get, kind of slap their hand slap. That doesn't exist. Instead, what you have are INDCs, which are the countries, they have come up with their own solutions of how much they're going to reduce their emissions by and within what timeframes. And so what they're figuring out right now is the financing behind that and what that works for, and what those targets for those INDCs, for those nationally determined contributions, are going to be. And so the biggest thing that they're fighting over right now is money, and how much money is going to be given to who to help them reduce their emissions, and by whom, and to what extent, and over what time periods.
That sounds great. Thanks so much. Do we have any questions for Claire?
I do have a couple questions. So, Claire, when the agreement is done, where is it published? Is it published on, or is it even publicly published?
Yeah. So every draft is publicly published. If you just go on the UNFCCC, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change website, they have all the different drafts up there. And there's actually, the organization that I'm with actually just started something called, there's a program out there called Read and Note, which is basically takes the text and everyone can comment on the text. It's basically like a giant Google Doc. But like thousands and thousands of people can comment on it and can actually set up like conversations and like have a Google Hangout over like a certain paragraph and like say like, oh, like this text should be like this. And like they should like, the text has all these brackets in it of what things can be potentially changed and like different options. Sorry?
Anybody can do that? Can put their input?
So this is done by the organization that I'm with, Citizens Climate Engagement Network. I wear a couple different hats, but that just got started actually, and so they're just starting to do that, and it's going to be really more integrated in COP22, not this COP21. But that's something that I think will be really cool for people to engage with in the future. But the draft in general that they're working on, you can find that on the UNFCCC website.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it would be cool to see what came out of it, because everybody asks like what happened, because you don't hear much about it in the media, especially here. And I think it's very sad. You're like, I'm originally from Spain, and I see it on Spanish media like on a daily basis.
Yeah.
But then when I read the U.S., or I don't know, maybe other parts of the U.S. is different, but in California, I don't see anything related to COP21, which is very sad. And so I was wondering, like, how can I get the draft and the information, the agreement? Okay, so that's really cool. Where's COP22 going to be at? Do you know?
Marrakesh, I think.
Oh, really?
Marrakesh, yeah.
Like a vacation to Morocco.
Yeah.
No, but I think it's a great question, Pedro. You know, how much of an open process it is. You know,
Yeah, right.
what is the stakeholder input, and how much input the civil society has? And I think based on the organization, maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah, so that's exactly what my organization is trying to do. So there's Article 6 in the Framework Convention on Climate Change, talks about how civil society needs to be engaged in the process of the COPs. But the thing is, nobody's actually used that article because it's too hard to do. That article has never been enforced because it's just, how can we engage the world? It's just seen as too big of a problem. It's like just too big of a challenge. So the organization that I'm with, the Citizens Climate Engagement Network, the point is to engage citizens with that. And so that Read and Note program that I was telling you about with the giant Google Doc with the text is to try and engage global citizens to have a voice. Because the idea is basically, you know, if you're looking, you know, if the negotiators are negotiating, okay, do I take out this like human rights segment of this? Okay, well, what if we had like 10,000 people, 100,000 people, 1 million people be like, hey, no, we want that, and they're from your country. I mean, that's huge. That's really influential. So the hope is to like try and get that out and up and running for COP22.
That's really cool. That's really cool. I have to search more about your organization, because, you know, you can't trust politicians. It's good that the civil society can get involved. That's
And the organization will actually is working with the UN to do that, to accomplish that. So it'll be through like official channels, which is really exciting.
Nice. Wow. Anybody can get engaged, or can like anybody. Really. Wow.
Anybody.
That's really cool.
Any citizen of planet Earth.
That is really exciting. That's what the planet Earth should be. Everybody could give their input, but some people have more power than others. So
That's a really great point. And any other questions for Rachel? I have another question, but I'll let other people ask. So, I mean, somewhat in the same vein, are there specific avenues for youth to have their voice heard in the process? Because, you know, youth are often seen, or, marginalized as maybe not informed or not, their opinions are not seen as equal. Or, and when in fact, the youth are going to be the one responsible for actually achieving the agreement set upon in COP21 and further. So I was wondering if there's facilitated avenues and paths for that youth input to be, really emphasized, highlighted in negotiations.
Totally. So there totally is. There's a lot of youth presence here, and the UN facilitates that, the youth presence and making sure that youth are heard. Take that with a grain of salt, though. So the UN, like, if you look at all the official channels, it looks great, like all the youth involvement and all of that. But a lot of times those youth are told to, just, come on and, like, listen to me speak. And, like, we're going to pick one of you to say something like that's very specific that we're going to help craft for you. So it definitely looks really great if you, like, look at all they're called Youngos, like, so kind of like NGOs, but for youth. And it's in the blue zone especially, so where you need accreditation, things are a little more, it looks great, but isn't necessarily as representative as it looks like it on first glance. However, in the overall, like in the green zone, especially, like, there is a big youth presence, and there's definitely a lot of youth here. There's a lot of students from different universities and, like, even high schools. There's a lot of different organizations. There's a great organization called Sustain Us that has accreditation, and they've been doing a lot of representing youth in the blue zone with accreditation, and they're really well respected within that zone. There's also different countries. Like, I met a girl from the Netherlands who represents the youth of the Netherlands. She was elected democratically. Like, I think in their election, like, it was on their ballot, like their nationwide ballot, to have a youth representative to come for the UN. And they have a really cool system where they basically have one youth representative, and they're a youth representative for 2 years, and in the second year they're training the next representative. And so it's a really cool program, and they really know what they're talking about. And they're also really well respected within the negotiating space, and are a force to be dealt with, which is pretty exciting.
Well, that sounds awesome. So these are the official youth delegates?
So certain countries have them and certain countries don't. But like the Netherlands has a specific country youth delegation that is, like, recognized by their government.
Yeah, Donovan, the United States also has a similar program. However, our youth delegate is selected through application, and there's like an extensive interview, and then a representative from basically the State Department chooses who the new delegate would be, but their term is only for 1 year. And so it's kind of cut short most of the time. But that's the current program that we have.
I see. Interesting, yeah. And just like one last question, how well are the SIDS represented, the small island developing states and other, marginalized areas of who are most impacted by climate change? I mean, I guess in general the SIDS and delegates, but also the youth in those communities, vulnerable areas.
So they've had a really big presence at this COP, which is really great, and they've really pushed for the 1.5 degree target, which is so important and so vital. But what's really cool being at the COP is that there's so many people dressed up in traditional dress. It's so much fun to see all the different headdresses, all the different clothing, all the different materials. That's been a lot of fun just to, like, see, and people just, like, totally embracing their cultures, and, like, people, like, I don't know, it's really inspiring to see. There's also, I went to a side event by the UN Development Program called, what's the name? The Equator Prize, and it recognizes Indigenous peoples who have taken steps, like, really awesome steps to help stop climate change within their own communities. And it was just amazing to hear from all these people from all over the world. One that was especially striking was a woman from Afghanistan, and she was just, oh my gosh, she was gorgeous. She had this beautiful traditional dress on with just like that. It was so funny because people were like, oh, it's like she's not wearing a burqa. It's like, yeah, like there's there's a lot of like cultures in Afghanistan that like people don't hear about, where it's not what you hear from mainstream media. And like, in fact, a lot of women in Afghanistan who are part of nomad tribes are like really strong women who are like the guys are like kind of scared of because they're like so badass. Anyway, tangent. She had a really good point. I thought something that was really moving was, well, the way the Prayer Prize is done, it's kind of like the Academy Awards, so it's like really officially done. But she's like, I want you guys to remember me, because like they basically all have to say thank you for like accepting the prize, and like then they kind of go on. But she's like, after those formal thank you, she's like, I want you guys to remember me. And what I have to say is that when my child is sick, when I'm at home, all I can think of is how my child is sick, and I can't sleep, I can't eat. I'm just trying to make sure that my child is better. And right now, our earth is sick. And how can we rest? How can we relax when our earth is sick? And I just thought it was really powerful and just really cool.
Yeah. No, that's awesome, Claire. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
I don't want to keep you too much longer, because I know you want to join back, the discussions. Unless there's any questions, really want to thank you for your pretty unique insight onto, what's happening right now at COP21. It is a historic moment, and hopefully, the people in the seats will make the right decisions for the society. So, but yeah, thanks so much for joining. And I don't know if you can stick around a little bit, but if not, we totally understand.
Yeah, if there's any last questions, I can definitely answer them. But other than that, I should probably go.
Sure.
Any questions?
Just wanted to reiterate, thanks so much, Claire. That was
Yeah.
really so cool to hear from somebody who's there.
Yeah. Oh, here, I can show you guys a little bit.
Cool.
So this is just a corner of the green zone, just like where there's a bunch of tables of like people doing different things, different groups. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Perfect. No, that sounds great. Thanks so much, Claire.
Yeah.
Especially calling from Paris, in the midst of all this fun.
Yeah, my pleasure. All right. Well, thank you guys for all the work you're doing. It's so important.
Yeah, we'll share your contact info and the organization with our network, so that if they're interested in really taking it to the next step, then they can join and have their input also.
Yeah. Oh, and one last thing. Two of my friends who are here, they actually just left. They're doing SDG work in the SUNY system, the New York state schools. And I don't know if you guys have heard, but the state schools of New York they're incorporating the SDGs into their, I don't know I forget exactly what the details were. I asked them, they left today, so when Rachel told me about this, I was like, oh, they'd be perfect for this call. But they're busy. But the New York University system is like incorporating the SDGs like somehow into their curriculum, or like how they're working things. And it's really cool.
So with me. I'm actually part of the SUNY system, and we are working on incorporating them in a bunch of different ways in an interdisciplinary system.
Great. So do you know Morgan Wood and Zach? Morgan Wood and Zach, I forget what his last name is.
There's there's like 64 different SUNY campuses, but
they're the president of like the whole sustainability council, though, I guess.
Okay, then yeah, I probably met them at the SUNY Sustainability Conference in just my head. But we are incorporating the SDGs throughout all our different programs, which is going to be really cool.
That's so awesome. Thanks for all that work. It's really cool. Cool.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Claire.
Yeah.
Hope to talk to you soon again.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Have a good one.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Bye.
So after hearing about this great insight from Claire, we're going to have Pedro sort of talk about, the science behind climate change and trying to, decouple the politics from the science, and, understanding, what are the causes of climate change and really why it's such a big issue and why it's such an urgent issue. So Pedro, based on his not only interest and campaign that he's running, but also his studies, will be showing us a presentation. And then we'll actually go back to COP a little bit later in terms of financing these different plans, and Lauren will talk about that. But Pedro, it's all yours.
Can you guys hear me? Yes, so nod your head. All right, cool. Yeah, my name is Pedro Piqueras, for those that don't know me, and I'm the founder of the Fair for All campaign with MCN, which is the sister campaign. And I'm also, I guess, the founder of the Fair Air Coalition. And what I wanted to present today, it was, yeah, the science of climate change, but also some of the mistakes that are, when climate change is discussed, I feel like there is some concepts that, are portrayed out to the public, and then people start saying certain things about climate change that then the people that are opposed to the idea of climate change use against people that support climate change in arguments. And it is all basically I guess, a misunderstanding of things. So I think it's very important to understand the science and to, in a way, be politically correct. I know there's a lot of political correctness in where we live, but it is important to be politically correct when we talk about climate change, because it really is a political issue, as much as it shouldn't be. It's really sad that politics in a way degrades science, and science took part of one specific side of politics. But if we just come back to the raw science, then we can all understand it, and then it is good for us to share climate change with the raw science versus biased political views. So okay, I'm going to share the screen. Tell me if you guys see. Can you guys see the PowerPoint? All right. Like it's full screen, right? All right. So, like I said, I'm going to present the science of climate, which is the unbiased truth, the facts and the data that scientists have gotten. And the consensus, the main consensus that the scientists have on Earth is that yes, the planet is warming. That is a fact. And people have gotten data from many different countries, many different scientific and research centers. So that is a fact. And people cannot argue against the idea that the Earth is warming. Even Republicans would admit to this in the US. So how do we know that the Earth is warming? So the facts, it is not just the temperature that was recorded. We can see a sea level rise. And I got this data, I don't show it here, but all this data that I've gotten is from NASA. This is all satellite data and ground data. So it is, non-biased. It is from the United States, but I feel like NASA does a great job at keeping their data as unbiased as possible. So yeah, this is the sea level rise data, and as you can see, the sea level rise, it can be caused by two different factors: the added water from the melting ice that we hear about, the ice caps in the poles and the polar bears. So there's that water, and also the ocean water expands when it gets hotter. So we get those two different types of factors. And also, as you can see in the two chart, the chart on the top tracks a change in sea level since 1993, and also the one on the right, it's derived on how much sea level changed from 1870 to 2000. As you can see, there is an uptrend. And the latest measurement, which was done in August 2015, was 66.91 millimeters. So it is increasing. We don't have to wait until, a few hundred years from now or thousands of years from now. We can see now that the sea level, it is rising. Millimeters might seem insignificant, but when you look at it from a global perspective, a millimeter, if you're really, really flat, could really be detrimental and cause a lot of floods. Another way for us to know this, that the Earth is warming, is by looking at the decrease in land ice. As you can see, Antarctica mass variations in 2002 decreased it is not a whole lot of years that they put on here, but at least since 2002, it has been decreasing. And also, same thing happens in Greenland. In Antarctica, the rate of change is about 134 billion metric tons per year. And in Greenland, it's 287 billion metric tons per year. And that is a lot of ice that is being lost. And some people say, well, okay, that's the North Pole and the South Pole, but that's not really happening in my hometown. But honestly, for example, in California, you can see the decrease of land ice. And a way to, here I have a few pictures of Yosemite, which is one of my opinion, it's not because I'm biased or anything, but it is one of the most beautiful national parks that the US has, in my opinion. And as you can see, there's a decrease in land ice because it's not snowing as much. And technically, yeah, we're supposed to be in an El Nino year and it's supposed to bring a lot more rain and snow. The chances of that happen, I haven't seen that rain yet. So there's being a decrease in that. And also, as we look at the North Pole, in 1980 to 2011, the ice cap has decreased quite a lot. And the way they do this is with satellite image, which NASA has. Also, the precipitation has changed over the past few years. And a lot of people believe that climate change, or that when the earth is warming, you're gonna get less rain everywhere, but that is not true. Depending where you are in the world is gonna be a complete different scenario. So as you can see, in California and the West Coast, it's gonna be drier. In the East Coast, it might be wetter. So it depends where you are in the world, and it depends on the season, the month of the year. It's a lot more complex than just generalizing the whole earth as it's getting drier. No, the wet places are going to be wetter and the dry places are going to be drier. And obviously it's going to move a lot of population, especially those that live in impoverished areas. Those are the ones that usually suffer from this the most. So the arguments that people usually use, I did some research about this, and it's good for us to know what people say, that people that don't believe in climate change say. And I got a bunch of facts that are really half true. So when they say that, climate change is not happening because there was record ice in Antarctica in 2004. And this is all true facts. So there was really a record ice in Antarctica in 2014 or 2004. But that was like 1 year, and it was very location specific. While in Antarctica, it was the record ice in the winter in 2014. In the North Pole, they had I don't believe it was the record low, but they had really low levels of ice. So this is not global. Yes, there was a record ice, but it is not taking it in a global perspective. If you look at it from a global perspective, the ice is decreasing. Also, this is record snowfall in some areas, like in the East Coast. Last year, it snowed a lot. Again, yeah, that's valid. That's a valid argument, but it's very location specific, and that is not technically. You cannot justify that climate change doesn't exist because it's colder and it snows more in some areas. Also, oceans are rising at a slower rate than Al Gore predicted. A lot of people say that when you discuss climate change with people that, I guess would be from a conservative party, that is what they say. And obviously Al Gore is not God. He's not the end all everything. So he just predicted the oceans rising. And just like with any scientist, that could be a mistake, or it could be, skewed in some ways or another. So no, obviously that is okay, but they're still rising. Polar bears are thriving. So apparently they are thriving. There's very high populations. I need that. Okay. And then, so polar bears are thriving. And the reason, I saw this too, it's one of the reasons why they say it's the warmest year on record is because they only rely on ground data that was affected by the urban island effect caused by the pavement. But that's actually not true. I mean, yes, there's some data that is affected by that, but most of the data that NASA has out there is satellite data. And there's another valid argument saying that nature produces a lot more CO2 than humans. And that is true. But when humans add a bunch more CO2 to the natural CO2 emissions, then that's when we have the problem. And a lot of people say that climate activists are hypocrites because they don't act on what they preach. Meaning, a lot of people will still keep the lights on every day. They are not using renewable energies. They're just saying things and they're not acting on it. And people see that as hypocritical. And those are all valid arguments. However, they're also very narrow-minded. So we gotta look at it from a more global perspective. Because global warming, nature, and humans, it's all interconnected. So now let's look at facts, like data, raw data from CO2. So this is CO2 over the past 500,000 years. And we see that there's a trend that goes up, down. It's a cycle, right? And that's kind of how the planet keeps the way it is, through cycles. So right now, we're at over 400 ppm. We have not been at that CO2 level for more than 500,000 years, which is alarming because it is obviously induced by humans. What has happened lately, is the Industrial Revolution and all the emissions from the Industrial Revolution all the way till now. So that is also a fact that CO2 levels in the atmosphere are induced by humans. If you can see that it is not following the natural trend. So also we know that CO2 is a greenhouse gas. So the current warming trend is particularly significant because most of it is very likely human induced. It is not 100% sure. However, as we can see, and this is something that we need to look at, is CO2 and temperature are very related. So as you can see, over the past few 100,000 years, as the CO2 concentration changes, the temperature changes as well. So they're both very interconnected, and obviously CO2, it is a fact, it has been shown in the laboratory, is a greenhouse gas. So a lot of people would have the argument that, it is not just about CO2, but people have modeled that if, things stayed in their natural state and there were no anthropogenic factors, meaning factors caused by humans, it would stay, the temperature would increase still, because yes, we are warming, we're coming out of an ice age, but it would increase at a way slower rate. So where does CO2 come from? This is from the United States. I got most of this data from the United States. It's like 37% electricity, 31% transportation, 15% industry, 10% residential and commercial, and then other. A lot of it comes from the transportation and electricity. So those are the ones that are being addressed at COP21 the most. And this is something very interesting that people use to fight against climate change, is the history of the Earth over the last 500 million years. And as you can see, the Earth goes up and down in temperature in so many different ways. But when you look, and when also another mistake that people make when showing climate change data is that they show the last 200 years, and they show that trend that increases temperature. So when other people that are kind of don't really believe this theory, when they go to the data and they see this, they're like, what the heck? It's not even warming anything at all. Like when you put everything in perspective, it's basically staying the same. But what you have to realize is that a couple degrees can really cause a lot of damage. And again, yes, we are warming, and technically, naturally, we're supposed to be warming. It's just a lot accelerated a lot by the humans. So the argument is millions of years worth of data shows that climate warms and cools on a cycle periodically and naturally. That is a fact. Climate change happens naturally. And technically, we're coming out of an ice age, and the Earth is supposed to warm up. So climate change is not caused by humans. Therefore, we cannot do anything about it. So let's just keep burning fossil fuels. So that's the argument a lot of people have. But honestly, that argument, it is not valid whatsoever. It is legitimate, but it is not valid because relying on fossil fuels is completely irresponsible. It doesn't just cause global warming, part of the global warming, but it also causes unhealthy air pollution. It can be detrimental to aquatic life, and it comes from non-renewable sources that we're eventually going to run out of. So we have to find other solutions regardless. And it's super dangerous to get from the Earth. So everybody's very concerned about CO2, but CO2 has a lot of collaborators, a lot of friends that are also adding to the greenhouse effect, such as methane, nitrous oxide, hydrofluorocarbons, perfluorocarbons, and so forth, as a hexafluoride. And what's really interesting is that some of these compounds are actually, they have a higher warming potential, meaning they can warm the Earth's atmosphere a lot more than CO2 can. The only thing is that we emit CO2 the most. So when you look at methane, for example, methane is actually more than 25 times greater than CO2 in warming potential. Nitrous oxide is stays 114 years in the atmosphere, and 1 pound of it can be almost 300 times that of CO2. And fluorinated gases can even be like tens of thousands the warming potential of CO2. It is not it is not that big of a concern because we don't emit as much of it. As you can see the graph, 82% of the emissions are carbon dioxide, then 10% methane, 5% nitrous oxide, and then fluorinated gases are like 3%. So it is very small amount, but they're still very important. And I think it is very important to have them in climate discussions because they do increase over years, and they're not being addressed the same way CO2 is being addressed. Another mistake that people do or make all the time, and people don't really understand the difference between the two, is global warming and climate change. Technically, they're the same thing, but at the same time, they're not the same thing. And in some scenarios, you can use both. In some scenarios, you cannot, because they're complete different physical phenomena. Climate change can also be global cooling as well. And they're both correct. It could be wrong. Global warming could be very wrong if you use it in a specific scenario, and that could get you in a lot of trouble. And so is climate change. And to people, I didn't know this, but after doing some reading, climate change apparently is less scary. I don't know why it would be less scary than global warming. But the reason why people like to use climate change a lot more is because there is, when you say global warming, you just think warming. You don't get past the idea of warming. So you think if it's colder in my spot, in my area, in my city, it is not happening here. Therefore, I shouldn't be concerned about it. So climate change is more of a holistic approach to it. So should we be, like I said at the beginning of the talk, should we be politically correct about climate? Well, yes, because when we are not politically correct, we have people like this. It's like, what if climate change is a hoax and we're doing this for nothing? Because when you are not correct, when you talk about climate change, people start to become suspicious, and that is what causes a lot of the issues that we currently face. So can we humans end climate change? I want to see what people say. Can you say yes or no with your head? Can humans end climate change? So surprisingly, from a science perspective, is technically no. We cannot end climate change, but we can slow it down. Meaning what Claire was saying earlier is that we can have a 1.5 degrees of warming versus 2 degrees of warming. So there is a lot of politicians and a lot of people out there, even people that are COP professors, everybody says let's end climate change, as it is something that we can actually do, but we cannot. Climate is going to change. Now, at the rate that it's changing is the alarming part. The Earth has no time for it to adjust, basically, and that is what's causing a lot of the issues. So we can do something about it. We can address it. Now, can we end it? That is where the conversation starts getting really meticulous, and that's when people start to become suspicious. So I recommend that you guys, as climate activists and people that really want to change the world, when you talk to people that don't agree with climate change, say no, we can slow it down. We cannot end it, because it is not something that just occurs from human influence and emissions. So solutions. When we look at solutions, there's a lot, and I'm not gonna go over it. I'm just gonna say it real quick because I'm running out of time. But there are many solutions. We can slow it down, and we can save ourselves from catastrophic events in the future. Not ourselves, but the future generations. And we're doing that not by ending it, but by slowing it down. And the main one is forego fossil fuels, which is very responsible, not because of climate change, but also because it's just detrimental to the Earth, period. Infrastructure upgrade, because some buildings use so much energy and so much, and they emit so many CO2 greenhouse gases from a holistic point of view. And this has to be a lot, there has to be a lot of investment in that. And then as, personal changes that we can make at our own home, we can move close to work, and we can, not commute for 2 hours like people do here in Los Angeles. We can consume less. People eat a lot. And people just own a lot of things, and sometimes we don't need a lot of what we have. We need to be efficient, which there's a big science to that. We can eat smart. A lot of food we buy, we also waste. So we need to watch that as well. And interestingly enough, if you go vegetarian and if you go vegan, you can actually help mitigate climate change. And I'm not going to go into that, but you guys can do research about it. Stop cutting down trees, because those are the lungs of our planet. Unplug. We use a lot of technology, and technology is important, but I feel like to a certain extent. This is something that I did research and also found is have less children. If you have less children, there's less people on the planet. And since there's already overpopulation, you technically, by having less children, you're going to help that. And investing in future fuels. But the most important solution is to educate. For people to know what climate change is and how it's happening, it is the most important part. So as an end quote, I really liked this when I was doing some of the research on COP21, is that climate change represents humanity's first planet-wide experiment. So it's an experiment. Like technically we have the data and we think that we're gonna solve it. And it has been proved that if we mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, we're gonna slow down global warming. And just like with any other experiment in any scientific setting, the worst thing you can do is nothing. So, and that's how I like to end up. And thank you very much. If you have any questions, you can ask me now, or you can email me, or yeah, that's it.
Much, Pedro. Am I still muted?
No, you're good, I
Oh,
think.
you can hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, okay, perfect. Thanks so much, Pedro, for this, really informative presentation. I think it's wonderful how in 15, 20 minutes you're able to tie in so much about, debunking the myths of climate change, identifying, what is actually going on, contextualizing what climate change means and really separating it from the politics, but also, realizing that we each have, a role to play, and there are very simple lifestyle and, behavioral changes that we can make to do our part, essentially. So I think I very much appreciate sort of the very well structured presentation. I mean, I'll let other people ask questions.
Yeah, of course. Certainly. Does anybody has questions?
Yeah, Pedro. I just wanted to say thank you. It was a very informative presentation, especially since I'm not really well versed in the facts on climate change. I'm fairly new to this coalition. But I did have a question regarding how we can go about, as youth and organizations, how we can go about spreading this awareness most effectively. So what kind of populations should we target when explaining the facts? Do we target other youth? Do we target politicians, the media? How can this best be spread?
I think there, in a way, I think there needs to be a revolution. Not revolution as like a big time war, but I think there needs to be people that just share the facts, because it's really sad that there has been a barrier, a political barrier in science. I don't know how this happened in the U.S. specifically. It just created a barrier. So I think as youth, by educating our own selves and by sharing this information with, because we're gonna take over the world. Like people are gonna die out, and we're gonna be the next generation. If we're an educated generation, a lot of the mistakes that our previous generations have made, we won't make. And that's the whole point of having these discussions, is that the people have made a lot of mistakes, and a lot of those mistakes have come from the lack of understanding of things. And I think there needs to be more representation of science in politics as well. So yeah, through the sharing of knowledge, not just from a science perspective, but also from the youth perspective and in politics, I think that is just basically share with everybody. I know some people might like roll their eyes. Oh, climate change, can you stop? Just ask them, what do you think climate change is? Like, just tell me how you think it happened. Do you think we can end it? Because a lot of people are just misinformed, and the media, especially people that putting them all in one group, which is not true. But I would say that the conservative people, for the most part, are the ones that don't agree with it. It is good to have conversations with those people, because those people are the ones that are against it, and the ones that vote against investing money and effort on climate change. So I would say the most important audience is the audience that doesn't believe in climate change, I'd say.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because a lot of misinformed citizens can be informed and can be made aware of the facts to really impact what their politicians have a role in, and how they can make them accountable, really, for the different policies that are out there.
Yeah, and it again, you just have to come back to the facts and just show the raw data, because if you just start showing, for example, if you get an article from CNN saying climate change this, you show that to somebody that only watches Fox News, you're like, well, see, this is why, because you got it from CNN. So you just gotta go to like NASA, you gotta go to all these laboratories, and sometimes it's hard to understand the data. But if you just go to the raw, unbiased data, and you just do research for yourself, and you show that to them, that it's a lot more meaningful and a lot more, how do you say, effective than if you search articles on political. And what's really sad too is that a lot of climate politicians have never studied science.
Yeah.
So even themselves don't have a lot of understanding, and this is where we get a lot of the, you know, the misconceptions and a lot of the wrong arguments and the wrong the wrong media from them. Because for example, even Obama said we can end climate change. Like, yes, he said it almost right, but no, because then people are gonna come back. We can't end it. We can't end it. So why are you saying? So now we're not gonna vote for you. So see, it's a very thin line. So
Yeah.
it all comes with education.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, Pedro, and it's how can you inform the public with the right information, you know, and make sure that whatever actions they take on are actually informed by the right, you know, data and awareness to drive the action. But I know, I mean, Claire mentioned it a bit that also, you know, you see this in the UN system, and there's a bigger push for the inclusion of science and scientific experts in policy design, implementation, and accountability. So how can science have a bigger role to play in the development of these sustainable agendas? Because it has to be driven from some sort of an empirical basis. And you know, what has been for the precedent, I think, in these UN resolutions is sort of a moral compass, right? All these things are based on human rights, and which it has to maintain. But at the same time, there used to be some sort of a data compass, where you know that your information is informed by empirical evidence, and that whatever solutions you put forward will actually rectify what you're trying to mitigate and reduce those risks, and not just implement things with the hope that they will. So.
Exactly. Yeah, and again, it's all the only thing we have technically as humans, as humanity, are the facts. That is the only thing that we can rely on, and it has been proven. CO2 and all those gases do warm.
Definitely, yeah. So thanks so much again, Pedro. If you have any other questions for Pedro,
Yeah. Just a short one. I was just wondering, Pedro, did you grow up in Spain?
I grew up until I was 15, and then I came here.
Okay, so I guess that'll change the answer then. Well, basically, like I'm from Texas, and I was lucky enough to go to a school where they showed the inconvenient truth to the whole school in like 6th grade, and like that's how I first got exposed to it. But like a lot of people I know and a lot of schools in that region, like it's never taught. So I was just wondering if like from like a international perspective what you think about like education. But if you moved when you were 15, I don't know if that's
no, but I actually do have I do have a point, like I do have a story to share. So in Spain, it's talked about it in schools, like how can I say, like they teach, you know, 1 2 3 or 2 + 2 is 4, like they teach climate change since you're very little. And when I came here, like I went to Baptist school undergrad.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of very conservative people. A lot of people were from Texas that came to my school in California, and a lot of people said that it was a hoax, that it was a lie, that it was not real. But the reason why people believe that is because Al Gore does say a few things that are true, but then the way he says it, it
exaggerates a little.
It gives wood to the fire.
Yeah.
So the same thing with saying let's end climate change. That is literally wood to the fire. Just keep the people coming back. So I did see that, and actually it's very interesting because in Europe, for the most part, conservatives and liberals believe in climate change. That is a general understanding of climate change. But here in America, it's very divided by politics, which I think is super interesting. How science got split by politics. It's like, how does that even happen? So, no, it's very interesting. And that, right, like you said, Texas, I'm sure that must have been when they showed that video. People were saying, what did people say afterwards? Were people like?
I was in like 5th grade. I don't remember too much, but like I went to a pretty liberal, small Montessori school, so like people were very on the same page, like the parents of the kids who went there. Mm-hmm. So all I know is it like had a huge impact on me. And like,
yeah, no, but also people that don't agree with it do have very legitimate arguments.
Yeah,
they, really they just look at it from a narrow perspective, and they also focus on the half. Again, it all comes back to like half truth, and that's why politicians have to be so careful with their words, because just saying something, you're just asking for people to not agree with it, when in reality it is true. So that's gonna, especially with climate change, it's such a big issue and such a controversial issue. It can be addressed by just literally educating.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so thanks so much again, Pedro. Really informative, and hopefully, if people have more questions, we'll have time at the end, or they can contact to rejoin the Fair Air Coalition.
Anytime. And you can share the presentation. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, definitely. So now, next we have Emily. Emily is, like we mentioned, is from Stony Brook. She'll be discussing another very interesting topic and helping. She'll talk a little and have sort of Q&A for about 10-15 minutes. And the topic here is climate change as a humanitarian crisis. So, and also links with other, both life on water and life on land. So I'll let Emily take it over. Thank you.
Am I unmuted? Am I good? Awesome. So yeah, I'm going to be talking, like Donovan said, about specifically SDGs 13 through 14. So that's climate action, life below water, and life on land as a humanitarian crisis, specifically related to what are called SIDS, which, if anyone doesn't know, are small island developing states. Just a bit of background on SIDS. There are, I believe, 52 territories in the world that are classified as SIDS. Only 37 of them are member states of the UN, though, and they have a combined population of over 50 million people. So at 37 member states, they represent roughly 1/5 of the United Nations member states, but they very infrequently don't have a voice because they are so small. Thankfully, that is changing. In 2015 in the summer, there was an entire conference based around SIDS for SIDS. So they got to have a voice there. And as we were told, they have a pretty big voice at COP21, which is great. There are there's actually many different issues that are associated with SIDS. And I have a short video done by UNDP that I would like to show. Let me make that full screen. Is it full screen? I don't know. Okay, cool.
It is not just a human right, but it's really a matter of life and death to a lot of people. A lot of kids and babies especially die because the water that they are using is not clean enough. It is unfortunate that we continue to see it in today's world, and I don't think that's right.
I think we're looking at children to get the idea to the very young people that water is very critical in Tuvalu, and conservation is there for if they want to survive.
Speaking of as a father now, I have 2 kids, and I'd like to preserve our forest for our next generation so that they can share what we have today, sometimes in the future.
The Buko Reef Trust initiative called Sun, Sea and Science was a popular school vacation program which included watershed hikes, wetland field trips, and introductory training in scuba diving.
Right now I have changed. Things I used to do, I don't do them anymore. And it's like I appreciate the environment even more.
By cleaning up these creeks, it has already made an impact.
It is an advantage to us farmers that we are able to use the land that were idle before because they're wet.
One of the things for me personally is to see the change in culture, the way of life of the community persons. I remember in particular farmers training day, farmers came to me and say, you know, I used to plant it in this particular way, but I didn't understand it your way. No, your way is the best way. And for me, that was a huge thing, because these are like older farmers, and you know, they stick to things when they have it.
Esta finca antiguamente no tenía nada de esto. A long time ago, this farm did not have any of this. Now we have contour curves to protect the soil. We have organic materials. We have the worm humus. It now has an irrigation system. The farm has progressed in the past, and with these improvements, it will continue progressing even better still.
The pilot projects of dry litter and compost toilet have been a really big success. There's scientific data that shows that these projects have reduced the amount of contaminant going into the lakes.
Instead of you flushing the toilet, press the button. Yeah, you just like get at least a heap of leaves, and then you throw it inside. It has to be like 70% of dry and 30% of green leaves, so that you can make sure. But we still use the toilet button, not the leaves.
Conserving water, and at the same time, it's readily available compost to the home, you know, and it helps the food production at the household level.
We are collecting data in the sea and online, using volunteers and scientists to help us see the linkages between our activities and their impacts, sometimes miles away.
It certainly make a difference to Tonga. In order for Tonga to attend a lot of regional meetings, knowing we don't have resource, and also they provide a lot of trainings on prosecution and enforcement of illegal fishing in Tonga waters.
We'll know we got it right when we can say that the island nations are fishing sustainably. They're enforcing the laws they've committed to. They have put in place the monitoring compliance mechanisms and tools that they need to sustain the fishery going forward, enjoying the jobs, the incomes, the livelihood creation. That would be a true model of sustainability, not only environmental sustainability, but social and economic sustainability for the people.
The rapid uptake in national policies and plans for IWRM experienced by the project is viewed by many within the Pacific IWRM family to be attributable to the on-the-ground results demonstrated to communities and governments. The results have created the impetus and examples of best practices required to reform national policies and guide investments. In this sense, the IWRM project has played a catalytic role with the region's development partners, planning their investments to scale up the best practices developed by IWRM.
So that was just a short video by the UNDP about some of the different programs that were and are continuing to happen throughout the SIDS. The problem that some people do have is there's this kind of ethical debate on whether helping the small island developing states is a good idea or not, because they want ideally the SIDS to be self-sufficient. But the problem is that the climate change and the potential for natural disasters there are so great that we need to at least help them get a running start. So right now, the biggest concern for a lot of developing states is natural disasters and also sea level rise, because with the sea level rise, many of these small islands will just go underwater and kind of cease to exist. there are also some political issues that are associated, like transnational crimes. What ends up happening is there are islands that will go into waters that aren't theirs and take the fish, which legally they do not own. But when you see this illegal fishing, you also see increased numbers of drug trade and guns and human trafficking, because they're already going into these waters, so they kind of might as well get more bang for their bucks, so to speak. With the SDGs, though, there are there's a lot of hope for the small island developing states. So 13 is to take urgent action against combat climate change and its impacts. Unfortunately, while we're seeing the effects of climate change here in the States and in the EU and all that, the small islands are seeing it significantly worse and significantly faster. Their sea level rise is going to affect them quicker than it affects us. SDG 14, which 10 by 2020 is the most involved in, is to conserve and sustainably use the ocean, seas, and marine resources. Most small island developing states, their number one source of income is from fishing. It sustains about 1 billion people worldwide. And once again, a lot of those are on the small islands. Where there's no fish, there's no chance for them to feed their family or to sell it to raise money for their family. So it is definitely, the fisheries crisis is not only an environmental crisis, but it's a social, economical, political, humanitarian crisis all in one. And then SDG 15, which is to sustainably manage forests, combat desertification, reverse land degradation, and halt biodiversity loss. Another really cool thing about the small islands are they have very unique ecosystems, and they have some of the most biodiverse forests in our world. But unfortunately, we are seeing the loss of trees, deforestation, loss of biodiversity at staggering rates in these small islands, because when they have to move away from fishing, they need to start using agriculture. And they need to have land, and kind of their unsustainable agricultural practices are both keeping them alive because they need the food, but kind of ruining them for the future. So there are a lot of different projects run through Global Environment Fund, GEF, UNDP, and just the United Nations as a whole to kind of halt these unsustainable practices through SDG 13, 14, and 15, and kind of get them that running start that they need to become sustainable. But like I said, some countries are nervous to do this because they don't want to feed on this dependence. So it's kind of that ethical gray zone of they need our help, but is there such thing as too much help? How much should we be involved? There's also concerns from the small island developing states of loss of culture because they do things a very specific way, and sometimes there are cultural aspects to how they do things, but if that's unsustainable and those practices stop, there's concern that that will be lost. So kind of keeping it sustainable while keeping their culture alive and well. So does anyone have any opinions? Is this ethical to step in and intervene when it's needed, or should we work from afar?
Well, Emily, I think that was a great presentation that you gave us. And in terms of stepping in, I feel like it's important to emphasize the partnership aspect. So instead of coming in from afar on a as needed basis, if we establish more of a partnership network with these developing communities and countries, and the developed communities and countries, I feel that will be more effective if we have a constant communication, if we have a constant open network for these things to be established and to flourish under. But as you said, it's such a delicate balance with how costly it is to fund a lot of these initiatives as a developing country, and how to keep the culture intact. So I think that's a good point that I don't think a lot of people know the answer. I don't know if there is an answer to.
It's kind of one of those double-edged swords where it's hard to find what is the right answer. I think taking, for anyone who wasn't at MCC 2015, I think that we really need to take the position of a sidekick in this. I think that we need to follow what these small islands think is best for them. If they say, hey, this integrated water resource management program is really working, let's keep this up, do that. But if some other country wants to come in and show them, hey, this is how we farm for cocoa beans or for sugarcane, and that isn't congruent with what their culture says, then we really need to take a step back, because small islands are so unique in so many different ways, from their biodiversity to their cultures to the people to just everything. But we want to keep them that unique. So I definitely agree that we need to take a sidekick approach and kind of let them guide us.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the advantages of taking that approach is establishing trust before coming in and changing anything. So if you establish that trust and that connection, then after a little bit of time, it becomes maybe easier to understand the culture and say, listen, maybe I know this drastic change won't work, but maybe we can implement these smaller changes and have an effect that way.
I think the sad reality of climate change is that we've had an impact on these SIDS cultures, given just how much their resources are being depleted, partially because of climate change, partially because of demand for fish, and there's a lot of factors into it. But I think that the United States needs to recognize that we are responsible for taking away from their culture, and now their culture is forever changed. And I don't want to speak for anybody who's had their culture taken away from them, but I do wish that we would talk about this whole aspect of it more, so that people like us who are so removed from the other side of the world at these islands where they're directly seeing the impacts, I just wish that we could bring this up more and wake people up to exactly what climate change and resource depletion means.
I agree. I have a message from Alejandra, who is an active member of 10 by 2020. She says that it is fine to intervene, but it is good to ask people what they want and how they believe things will get better. So it seems like we're all in agreement that we shouldn't come in as the superheroes and say, hey, as a world, we kind of messed up because we kind of caused a lot of climate change and stuff, but here's how we made it better. So I think it's definitely that very difficult balance that we have to find, especially because it's such a time-sensitive issue, because even as we speak, COP21 is going on, but climate change isn't stopping. The sea levels are still rising. They're still running out of fish. Their land is still being degraded, and it's kind of this horrible cycle where climate change leads to fish die-offs, which means that they have to go and move on to land, which means that their land is being destroyed, which leads to climate change. It's this kind of cycle that can't really be stopped unless it is by every country agrees to stop the cycle even a little bit. So.
Definitely. Yeah, those are great points, Emily and everyone else. And, what's even more get into a deeper discussion is, different aspects of people know what needs to be done. The question is, who is accountable for what aspects of the action and the agenda? One of the big things is financing,
Mm-hmm.
And so there's the financial, burden rests on those who were mostly responsible, so post-industrialized countries, to sort of front for the repair, but at the same time giving the SIDS and other vulnerable communities the opportunity to decide what they want to fund and at their national capacity, things like that. And Lauren will talk about that very soon. But so there's different aspects, and different people can be responsible for different things, which makes it more interesting, but more exciting. So.
Yeah, for anyone who is interested in specifically for SIDS, this was actually released during my time at Ocean Sanctuary Alliance over the summer. It's a snapshot discussion paper. I just posted it into the group chat on reinvigorating international policy debates around how small islands can finance and meet the sustainable development goals.
Mm-hmm. Because
so it's a little bit technical, but it's very interesting to see how these small islands are kind of contributing to their own financial plan to fulfill the SDG. So even though they are so small and they are by far the most affected by climate change and this life on water and life on land, they are still active in trying to fulfill the SDGs, not only for themselves, but for all the other member states.
Yeah, definitely. And, financing is such an important gateway to, accomplishing these massive changes in infrastructure and all that. And, at the same time that the SDGs were being developed, there was also a financing for development conference that happened in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, where, there was, how do you find the appropriate funding and what sources do they come from, and, how much do local municipalities cover, how much does, UN agencies covers, and what is the role of the private sector. And I think they're having a very similar discussion at COP21 right now with the Green Climate Fund. Sadly, but also true, everything has to run with money, or else you won't have resilient and long-lasting change, because whatever gets implemented has to be done through quality. And how can we, as advocates and people who are aware, lobby for more funding and for more financing of these programs by our governments when they make pledges. So I don't want to take too much away from Lauren, but Lauren will give us some of an intro into the Green Climate Fund. But it's interesting to think about what is our role in lobbying our governments who made commitments and keeping them accountable to those commitments, or even increasing them. So, yeah, Lauren, feel free to take on for a few minutes.
Sure. So as I mentioned before, I'm not really well versed, so it's been very interesting to hear a lot of these different perspectives on climate change, and really informing. So I'm just going to touch a little bit on the Green Climate Fund that Donovan just mentioned, and how it's used to really finance a lot of the initiatives for developing countries. I'm just going to read a short blurb from the Green Climate Fund website to kind of explain what it is a bit, and then move into more discussion, because I feel like that's the most valuable thing. So on this website, it says, the fund is a unique global platform to respond to climate change by investing in low emission and climate resilient development. GCF was established by 194 governments at COP16 to limit or reduce greenhouse gases. in developing countries and to help vulnerable societies adapt to the unavoidable impacts of climate change. Given the urgency and seriousness of this challenge, the fund is mandated to make an ambitious contribution to the united global response to climate change. GCF is accountable to the United Nations. It is guided by the principles and provisions of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. It is governed by a board of 24 members, comprising an equal number of members from developing and developed countries. The Green Climate Fund is the only standalone multilateral financing entity whose sole mandate is to serve the convention and that aims to deliver equal amounts of funding to mitigation and adaptation. So that's just a brief kind of background on what the GCF is. And moving into like a question, I want to know what your thoughts are as to how youth organizations and citizens can really lobby their countries to pledge these certain amount of money for the fund, and how we can really hold our countries accountable for what they pledge.
So the Green Climate Fund, their goal is 100 billion, is that right?
Yeah, I believe that's right.
So I remember Claire just mentioned the U.S. has pledged to give 800 million. And like, it just makes you like, I don't know. I mean, we all know how much money the U.S. has, and how much we've contributed to greenhouse gases. So yeah, I think there is a responsibility for us to step up and ask for more from our country. And from what I know, there's lots of ways to do that it could be done. But right now, we're also focused on our like internal government and policy in terms of climate change, that we're not really focused on the aid that needs to, in addition to our domestic policies, the additional aid that needs to go out of our country. And so I definitely want to look more into what's going on now that I've like seen the perspective of 800 million versus 100 billion.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, taking into account how much we contribute as a country to the greenhouse gases and climate change, it's really pertinent that we hold our country accountable as citizens and as youth organizations. Really, I feel like as youth, we're going to be dealing with this problem more so than the politicians are now. So getting this ball rolling is really key to the first step. And one of the big problems that was mentioned earlier that the Global Climate Fund really tries to address is this idea that as a developing nation, it's often costly and inefficient sometimes to integrate eco-friendly technologies to reduce emissions. And the Climate Fund is geared towards funding a lot of these initiatives in both the public and private sector for developing countries. But one of the problems is that a lot of times it's money, and there's no real establishment of this partnership. It's more of a, we'll give you the funds to do what you need to do. And yeah, you provide some resources to knowledge, but how can we really establish a better relationship as developed countries with developing countries? There's no real answer to this, but what are some ideas, some thoughts on really making this relationship more concrete, more dynamic in the way that it moves both ways?
Is that to anybody, or is that to a specific person?
No, it's anyone.
Anyone. I think one of the main things that keeps people away, not just here in the States, but also in Europe, is, I guess, the lack of understanding from a global perspective. I think that there's, especially the developing country, it's not of our same religion. For example, in the US, that country is Muslim, for example, and it's still developing. I feel like a lot of people are scared to mix. Like in a way, they're very different. So a lot of people just try to keep their efforts for their own country. They care for themselves. And I think there's also a lot of exploitation in developing countries that are currently being done by developed countries. So I think that needs to stop. The US has stopped a lot of that, but countries like China are still exploiting. For example, when I went to Africa, when I went to Tanzania, their forests were basically being taken by China. All their wood, because China is now more of an industrial country, all the wood they take to China. So technically they're leaving them without resources. So I think there needs to be more of an more of an empowerment versus we're just gonna come take everything that you have and then we're gonna leave you even poorer. Because we care about ourselves, we don't care about you. So there needs to be more of a, we care about the world versus we care about our country. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a great point.
I change a mindset. Because I feel like people just care about their own community. Well, it makes sense that people care about their own communities, but I feel like it's usually people that haven't been exposed to a lot of cultures or a lot of people from different nationalities or people from different races that are the ones that hold back and don't want to, in a way, invest in the world. They want to invest in their own country.
Yeah, that's a great point.
It comes back to education, to be honest.
Yeah.
Education.
Exactly. And education is a two-way street, right? So like instead of having it be such a narrow-minded focus towards, oh, we're going to be helping these developing countries, we're going to be gearing all of our education towards that, it needs to come both ways. So we need to gain education from them as well, that's a great point that you made.
Yeah, that is very true. Yeah, a lot of countries are very stubborn, and it's interesting how much you can learn from a developing country. It's really like astronomical how, like for example, like I keep saying the US because I live here, but I would say Spain, and I can't find an example at the moment, but there is a lot to learn from developing countries. I think that developed countries can learn.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think especially it has to be like mentioned a partnership where, developed countries can provide certain knowledge while developing countries have so much more knowledge because, when you want to develop context-specific technologies or culturally appropriate technologies, which is sort of what is needed for real resilient impact, then you need the input from both. To really, if you want to scale a technology in a local context that is foreign to you, you have to work with whoever you're hoping to have that impact with. But yeah, these are great points. Any other questions for Lauren or any other comments before we move on to our last speaker? No? Lauren, any feedback or?
No, I think it was a great discussion. Just another thing to keep in mind is that the Green Climate Fund is great for funding developing countries, but it also doesn't account for our own contribution to the greenhouse gas and different emissions. So really, I don't know if it's a tax on carbon that we put. I don't know what the answer is, but keeping in mind that we have to also hold developing countries accountable for the continued increase in emissions.
Can I actually comment on the carbon tax thing real quick?
Yeah.
So
please do.
I know that they wanted this. They wanted to. I don't, because I haven't read the actual negotiation that came out of COP21, but I knew that a lot of countries were going to vote to have a carbon tax in China. If that happens, that's gonna. I think it's gonna change the way China does things so much. The way the export import quite quite astronomical. So I wonder how that's gonna go. Because I mean, taxing a country that is going under an industrial revolution, I don't know. I don't know how that's gonna affect the economical situation.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good point.
It's gonna be very interesting to see. You know, all these countries are taxing China, and then China is basically making their countries with everything because everything is made in China.
Exactly. So it's going to have a widespread effect.
Oh, massive! It's gonna be massive. So I wonder if that got accomplished or that just never happened. It's just gonna stay the same. I wonder. I really wonder.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
Definitely. I just want Alejandra wrote a message. I guess if you can, definitely read it on the group chat. Have some input into these discussions. How to really lobby to our governments, sending letters, congressional action teams, focus on specific issues. So these are great suggestions to really how do you turn the passion and the awareness once you have it, which we talked about earlier in the discussion, in the forum, into specific action. And I think that's sort of a good transition actually into what Tim has to discuss. So Tim is with Make It Real, which is an initiative that seeks to drive meaningful impact of youth in the SDGs. And I'm going to let really Tim talk more about the initiative and how can we learn from those best practices and really turn the passion into action.
So thank you, Donovan. Actually, yes, I'm gonna tell you a bit about taking action through our initiative. So Make It Real is a project from COP21, which is a conference of youth held in parallel from the COP21 events. So basically, it was 5,000 people joining hands in Paris to discuss and take action around climate change. So personally, I work on the COP11 strategy, and on a daily basis, I work for a competitive intelligence consulting cabinet. So I got in touch with Youth for SDGs through Erica, and I found it was a great initiative. So thank you very much. So more about Make It Real. It is an open innovation track. What is open innovation is only about bringing ideas from wherever it may come from to solve a specific issue. For COP11 it was climate change, but it may be a much broader scope. So basically, as you all know, the situation is critical for desirable life conditions sustainability. And we definitely needed to raise awareness from youth and beyond. And the strategy we wanted to adopt to go beyond declarative and passive positioning is to give anyone, whatever their background is, their culture or location is, an opportunity to connect and take action together as a team. So basically, we really need to get, and this is our conviction, we need to get to make an habit of like taking care of our own motivation to, for example, mitigate climate change or having a personal impact. And this is really what this initiative is about. It's really about building a motivation into people. And in the best case scenario, those people will be able to take action with a group. So I get a little bit into more detail. Make It Real is a 3 days format, and to make it quick, on the first day you share visions, on the second day you share strategies, and on the third days you take action through resources mobilization. So it can be any kind of project that you take. It can be a company, but it can also be a law proposal. It can be an event. It can be just connecting two people that have to meet. And we did pretty well during COP21 because we produced 10 projects that way. And what is interesting is that people who took part to the initiative were people from very different backgrounds, and it produced very um, uh, exotic ideas. Like, for example, one I really like is a reality show that allows to make a desirable image out of the change makers. So basically, it's about bringing the change maker figure to the massive audience. So it was a pretty interesting initiative, and the people who held it were from 3 different countries. And yeah, they were very complimentary, and this initiative could not have started if they did not meet in this specific room. So this is kind of contributive democracy. Like if you contribute, you have legitimacy. And this is how things should be in those times, because we need 3 things. And we promote those 3 values through the initiatives. We really need to get a more quicker action, because this is a state of emergency, and if we don't do something now with something very disruptive, it's going to be very difficult to mitigate climate change. So organizing such events on a regular basis allows people who were not supposed to talk to each other to elaborate solutions locally. Secondly, it's about trust, because as you know, ignorance of other people, and especially other cultures, is one of the biggest issue we have to face. To their investing, for example, this is one of the issues we're facing at COP21. Investing is not only about investing, it's also about trusting the results and the good use of the money, etc. So through that kind of events, it's a good way to prove that people already started to build prototypes and proof of concepts. So, and to meet each other so that we can discuss on a wider basis, so an international basis. It's an international initiative. And what is also important is that you have to make the impact desirable. And this is a very strong point for us. We want the shift to come from each individual, and this is why we're gonna put the emphasis on introspection, like self-motivation, and also a deep analysis of the context. So connecting the personal motivation of the participants with a deep understanding of where this participant can fit if he wants to achieve a certain logic or a model of society. So this is mainly the work we do at Make It Real. It's not only about making an event, it's also about animating a network and connecting the right people so that they can make their vision come true. And basically, the way we do this is through a form, which showed to be very relevant during our first kickoff. So I'm going to share with you this form on the chat. It's right there. So it's going to ask you a few questions about who you are, when you want to go, what your vision is, and we at Make It Free are going to connect you with the right people. So this is where is the strength of the network. You also have a Facebook group for more social interactions, which I'm going to share right now, which is called Make It Real Open Innovation Community. And basically, you can get help from other people in the network. If you have any issues, like you don't have enough information, or you don't have enough resources, or you need some partners, Make It is a very good way to find partners. And this is a very hard thing to get if you're not prepared. So basically, those are the two main tools you can use to access and benefit from the initiative. And it's promising to grow each COI. We are planning to make another one at COI 12. And what will be interesting is to do more than just conference of youth, and to provide a kit that you can use in your own country to use open innovation to gather people around your city and make them meet and give them a reason to meet. So basically, this is what we're aiming for. I hope I was pretty clear, and if you have any questions, you can share it now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim. It's wonderful to hear the work we've been doing, and that you were able to launch this at COI 11 in Paris. Really nice. I mean, I think one of the biggest things I think, is appreciated is the value of individual ideas, and how do you personalize an action plan for that specific idea, and bringing people from different disciplines who can together complement each other. And I think it's really wonderful that you're trying to maintain the personality and individuality of every idea. So, no, thank you very much for that. I'll let other people ask questions, and then but yeah, if anyone has questions for Tim, please do ask.
Tim, I was wondering, okay, so I just wanted to see if you had like a link to a website or anything, so we could just like check it out on our own more to learn more.
So can you go again?
Yeah, I was wondering if you have a link to a website so we could like check it out.
Actually, we are very underground in our functioning model. So basically, the best, okay, I got this thing. I'm going to share it with you. It's on COI 11 website, and it shares the vision we provide. So many examples as well of what you can imagine producing. So check it out. This is a link, and everything is explained. You got the detail of the 3 days, and of course, if you want to be an ambassador, you can adapt the model. It's not about the methodology; it's about the outputs. And what is utterly important is the form that I share with you, because this is what we use to connect people, and this is where action takes place. So basically, here are the links. And as you can see, for example, during COP21, they couldn't afford to talk about demography, and like Pedro said, that it was an important issue, and this may be a room for you to talk about this topic and to act on it. is without constraints, so you can be free to share any idea you want.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tim. I think it's a wonderful initiative, and we're going to share the forms you sent us with our networks, and also when sharing this video, so that others can learn more about the initiative and connect. Because I think also the more people that are engaged, the more you're able to find links, which I think is really what you're trying to highlight. So I'll definitely share those information. Just to respect everyone's time, since we've been going for 2 hours, and I think we've had such interesting discussions that it's passing by very quickly. But just to recap again, we started with a very good discussion live from COP21, and the insight from Claire, and she sort of connected us to the excitement happening in Paris. And I think, Tim, you're also in Paris right now. Very nice. Yeah. So, we had the pleasure of being connected with that atmosphere and, history in the making in that regard. Then we had sort of a very nice presentation from Pedro, trying to debunk myths related to climate change and understand the science behind it and how we can take, simple steps to mitigate it in our daily life. Then we heard from Emily about climate change as a humanitarian crisis, the urgency of the issue, how it's interlinked with many other sort of developmental challenges on land and water. And then we heard from Lauren, connecting with, well, if you put an action plan in place, how do you finance it? Who finances it? Since that's really a big driver of development. And now just from Tim, sort of how can we mobilize more action at the grassroots level amongst youth, which is definitely what we want to advocate for on this campaign, what we want to advocate for. I'm sure the MCN advocates for, and I think what we have to advocate for as a generation to fulfill sort of our generational responsibility and our potential to really make a true change towards, contributing to this developmental agenda. So I think from all these 5 presentations, which were all very different, we all picked up different action steps or awareness that we can spread with others, and things we can do to really, increase our efforts or connect others who are interested. So I just want to, provide just a few minutes for everyone who has any questions to ask. Give you a few minutes. So if you have any questions, please let us know, either for any of our speakers or just in general.
I just had to let everybody know I need to run because there's a ride waiting for me. But that was really great. I really love that, especially as somebody who studies this stuff and struggles to find people who have as much passion and energy about it or as much curiosity about it. So everybody have a good day, and I'm excited to see what happens with COP21.
Yeah. Thank you, Rachel. So anyone else have last questions or comments or quotes?
I think this was very good. Thank you for setting this up, for
Yeah.
having all of us together. We should do this more often.
Yes. Yeah, so Julie, do you want to say something?
Just one thought. I mean, not even a thought, just a comment. Like, I can only hope the COP21 negotiators can communicate as effectively as you all do, because if they can, we're good to go. But thank you, everyone, for participating and engaging and listening so closely to your peers. I'll be sending a recording to all of you, and I really hope that you share this with everyone you know. I think everyone can benefit and learn from this conversation. It was really incredible. So just, a big thank you, and hope to see you again at future forums.
Just to add to that, so I took part of a UNEP debate that they had online too, like the UNEP gathered in Nairobi, and they had it online, and there was like 3 people online. 3 people, and they were barely talking. So we're doing a lot more, and this is why I think civil society really is doing a lot greater things, I think, than conditions, underground and all that. It's just we're talking. We're the ones talking. Actually, it's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing way more than the UNEP.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we have to continue with these efforts. And I think, both with humility and with passion and drive, we can make a big impact. So, all right. Well, thank you again to everyone. Big thank you to our speakers and also to 10 by 2020 and the Fair Coalition for, working for Youth for SDG with Youth for SDGs on this wonderful forum. And we really look forward to the next one. We'll be in touch very soon. So thank you again.
Sounds good. See you soon.
Thank you.
See ya.